Anybody would like to tell us what they're kind of hoping to get out of today's session? I know it's not really a session, it's a workshop, but anyone from an organisation that's hoping to learn more about how you could apply adjustments? Okay, fab. Anyone, any sort of parents or carers that are hoping to learn how to ask for adjustments in the workplace? Okay, fantastic. What a good mix. It's lovely. Well, enjoy. We're going to wait until, a few more people come in, just give them time. But we'll be with you shortly. Enjoy the aircon. We will. For joining us for this fireside chat. So, fireside chat being, we're going to keep it nice and informal. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. We are going to do a bit more of a Q&A at the end as well. But if there's anything that's not clear, please do let us know. So today we're going to be looking at workplace accommodations or adjustments. Reasonable adjustments as it's termed within the Equality Act, but accommodations is the more inclusive term. And specifically looking at the neurodiverse and disabled communities and what actual tangible steps can we take to try and improve our workforce, our workplaces or education or services to try and make the world more inclusive, which is our goal. Merrin and myself are going to be sharing a lot of our own experiences. So Merrin as a global HR guru, basically, and myself as an autistic and disabled founder and CEO of Thinkady, who we have a stall upstairs. Feel free to go and find out more about that afterwards. It is upstairs, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's upstairs. Fantastic. Okay. A little bit about me. I started Thinkady because I've experienced firsthand the difficulties of education, going into the workplace. Feel free to come on in and take a seat, everybody.
There's a few seats up here.
There's a couple of seats at the front if you need them. So I'm autistic. I'm obviously neurodiverse. I'm bisexual. I am disabled. Sometimes I use a wheelchair. Sometimes I don't need to. What else am I? I'm a woman. That says it all. So the sort of falling into those protected characteristics, but especially being in that kind of place where I'm half in, half out, with being partially, well, I am disabled, but not being completely visible, has given me this amazing privilege to be able to say, well, do you know what, I can do a lot of these things sometimes, and other times I absolutely can't. So I think it's absolutely my responsibility to communicate to everybody, really, my experiences when I can, so that everybody can understand how we can make the world a better place for everybody, and a more inclusive place. So, just have a quick look at what I was going to say.
It's okay, I can jump in quickly and talk about myself anyway. So I have worked in HR for 13 years, and I've worked in consultancy for half that time, and I've seen the good, the bad and the ugly. So I've seen organisations who are incredibly proactive in their approaches, and I've seen organisations that have learned the hard way, that they haven't gone about things the right way. So I'm in a wonderful position where I've been able to advise a lot of organisations on what they can do to make the workplace a better place, and the benefits that this can obviously reap, which I think hopefully we all know how many benefits there are to the workplace anyway. So Sophie asked me to come on the Thinkady journey a few months ago. It's something that is very important to me, that EDI space is instrumental. I myself am very much an ally, and it's something I promote internally, externally. So that's when I came on board with Thinkady. So we're going to talk a bit now about kind of the journey of the workplace, how it looks for employees. So I don't know if we want to move on to...
Yeah, absolutely. So we thought we'd start off looking at what is the typical journey that we have with employees in the workspace. What typically happens? So, first of all, we start with a job advertisement. This is what typically happens. And this often looks something like this. Now, this is something... apologies, by the way, for the font, for the pale coloured background, but this is quite literally a screenshot of something we found online. And actually that's the point, is this inclusive? Is this job advert inclusive? well, many people would find this really difficult to engage with, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Everything from the font, as you quite rightly said, Sophie. There's things in here, so referring to excellent communication and interpersonal skills. What does it mean? Is it even relevant for the job? A lot of the time it's almost put in by default, but if you've maybe got an IT technician, do they need to have these attributes, as a business would call them? And it's not always necessary. There's everything from how overwhelming it is to the paragraphs altogether. So right from the first step, organisations can do more than just say, we promote a diverse workplace. They can change and review their entire job descriptions to actually speak about that, to really reflect the message that they're trying to come across.
Absolutely, and from a personal point of view, you know, a few years ago, if I had seen excellent communication and interpersonal skills on a job advert, I would not apply for that job. Despite the fact that I could be in this room right now talking to a whole room full of people, I didn't think I have excellent communication skills, because my trauma and my experience through my journey has been, well, I'm autistic, so my communication isn't great. That's what everybody says, right, about autism. But everybody is different on the spectrum, and this is where we want to take this journey today. So, the next step being application forms.
So, Sophie, what is the benefit of an equality monitoring form?
Right, yes, that's a good question. So, quite often with our application forms, which tend to be different for every single organisation, I don't know if anybody here has applied for lots of jobs and every single job has a different application form, and you're trying to copy and paste it between each one, but the format changes as soon as you do, and it's just a nightmare. And to be honest, I've given up so many times. The equality monitoring form that often comes with it, there are many difficulties to that, being, first of all, you don't actually need to send that form off. They request it, but there's no requirement to do it. And then, at that point in time, before you've even applied for the job, when you know that there's so much discrimination in the workplace at the moment, do you really want to share all those vulnerable pieces of information about yourself at that point? Even though we know that HR don't look at them, which they are not supposed to, it is possible that they can, and that itself becomes a barrier. And then the form itself, you know, it's quite like the form we've seen before.
I think we've got an example on the next page.
Good point. So this is a typical equality monitoring form. Lots of tick boxes, an awful lot to read. And if you're applying for, you know, you might be applying for 20 jobs, you've got to fill this out 20 different times in a different format, which is just time consuming and exhausting.
Where does it go? What do organisations actually do with it? I think a lot of individuals don't know what happens to this information.
Well, Mary, tell us what happens to this information.
So organisations use it to track their diversity data, essentially is what it comes down to in a nutshell. Not a lot happens after that stage, really. A lot of individuals also put they prefer not to disclose, quite rightly so. A lot of individuals don't feel comfortable disclosing it. So, worst case scenario, it gets put in a pile somewhere and never referred to again. Best case scenario with some really proactive organisations is they'll upload this data, look at their stats, look at seeing if they're meeting their targets. A lot of organisations will have key performance indicators based on diversity data. Are they seeing people in managerial positions from diverse backgrounds, etc.? So that's where organisations can be really proactive with this. But that's best case scenario. A lot of the time, as I said, it just gets shoved somewhere, never to be looked at again.
And in a previous role of mine within the Welsh NHS, we were searching to find these forms in people's emails, in managers' email inboxes that had left the organisation, just so we could try and find out the diversity of our organisation. And then when we did, we found eventually, after, you know, multiple staff searching for all this, collating all this information, just so that we could give a statistic in a meeting, you know, that probably wasn't listened to that well either, because what we found was 0.5% of people had said that they were disabled in our workplace. Well, actually we know that there's somewhere between 16 and 21% of the demographic of the UK that actually are disabled. So, and even that's an approximate. So from a strategic point of view, what do you do with that information? We could go out, we could say, right, we need to more proactively seek more people with disabilities so we can bring that diversity in, so that we can reflect our stakeholders and make sure we're providing that great customer service that's going to make a big difference to our stakeholders and our clients and our patients. However, what if the problem isn't actually about not having the majority of those people who have disabilities? What if the problem is actually that your staff don't feel comfortable to admit that they have disabilities? So how do you know that information? We found a way to work through that with Thinkedy, which we will talk to you about later. But just to sort of continue on this journey.
So you filled in a few forms, written your CV, haven't even got to the interview stage, but you get to an interview, congratulations. But what happens if you need adjustments? So are you going to pop a random HR inbox, an email? Are you going to pick up the phone? This again is such an overwhelming process for individuals. And interviews themselves are not always the most accommodating. They often have pre-formatted questions that might not even be relevant to the role. So they need to be tailored individual interviews for every single role, really. It might be that organisations aren't thinking of proactive approaches, such as sending out the questions in advance to individuals that would benefit from it. So there's so many things in terms of the interview process. Again, individuals are having to battle again and again for these reasonable adjustments, and they might not even know what might benefit them. And this is key. We're talking about some examples here, but if your first time in the workplace, you might not have heard that you might be able to request these things in advance, and you should. The organisations right from the offset have an obligation to make these reasonable adjustments for individuals.
Absolutely, and you know, within teams that I've worked in, we've had requests that at first they might come through and you think, oh, I don't know, is that going to make it fair for everybody else if we allow everybody to, or if we allow this one person to have that adjustment but we don't allow everyone to? Just allow everybody to, just give everybody the questions in advance. But make sure that you're also providing those questions in a format that is inclusive. So we'll go on to that as well.
And if you're not in a role which needs to think on its feet, why do you have an interview which makes people think on their feet, right?
So the current sort of process for requesting adjustments or accommodations in the workplace is you can do it verbally, of course. You could just ping an email. But if you wanted to really make it official and formal within the Equality Act and make sure that your needs were going to be met, it is recommended by ACAS that you go on and download a template such as this. This is one example from ACAS, where you can input your information and you can formally request that. Now, the reason that they ask you to do this via template is because during the process, if there wasn't a time or date on that, there's no statistic to say how quickly people have responded to that. And without knowing whether people are responding in a timely manner, discrimination can happen in that time between, and it is the employer, the line manager, and the organisation who are then liable for that discrimination, which is exactly what it is. So we recommend to put in a template. However, is this accessible? Is this inclusive? First of all, you need to go onto a website online, you need to find the page, you need to download the template, then you need to make sure that you can actually access this, whether you might be using speech recognition, it might not be formatted correctly. Bit of a nightmare. Or to ask for your adjustments. Now, I hope I'm not stressing you all out, because I'm feeling pretty stressed even thinking about all of this, but we will get to how we can turn this all around.
We do have a solution.
The other key thing, just going back to the slide before, really, is where this information is going. When we fill out all of these forms, they could be going to an email inbox, they could be a paper copy that you've sent off, and then that's sitting somewhere within GDPR in a filing cabinet. Who's going to know when to get rid of that? Most policies are about 7 years until you have to destroy that if it's not still in use. Who's noted when to get rid of that information? So much to think about to be compliant here within the Equality Act.
So you get the job. Yay, we're exhausted. As Sophie said, this is really overwhelming, and this is the problem, and this is why so many individuals are finding that the workplace isn't inclusive, because this entire process is tiring to even just talk about. But you get the job, and some organisations, again, can be really proactive. They might give you an occupational health form, which then refers you to specialists that then can work with the organisation, put in these tools and accommodations. But a lot of organisations don't even think about this. They just want people in the door, on the job, behind the desk, and don't really think about what might be needed. And again, we got a whole other form to complete. Oh my goodness.
And also, you know, the questions, you get the job and then you're given a medical history form and you're asked, when you were 2, did you have an MMR? Did you get diphtheria? You're thinking, oh my gosh, now I need to go and communicate with my doctor, who I don't even know whether they've still got my, you know, and I may have moved countries and I've got no idea. And the stress of all that communication and having to work all of that out, and then having to do it again for the next application, but you may not have stored that information, and where do you find it? Or you might be applying for jobs years later.
It's a lot, and it can feel really, really intrusive. Not to mention individuals that maybe been through trauma, they might not know or have an awful lot of this information to hand either, and we see that time and time again.
And there are a lot of gaps that can happen in this journey as well, because a lot of this journey we rely upon line managers, particularly in large organisations, to understand this process thoroughly, to understand inclusion and EDI really well, so that they know how important each of these steps is, and to be supporting the employees through this journey. But the line managers themselves might, well, you know, there's a 21% chance that they might have some form of disability or neurodiversity. Can they even read these forms that are coming to them? Can they read this occupational, you know, 3 or 4 page occupational health report? Do they know what to do with that information when it comes through? And again, it could be in writing, it could be on an email, GDPR, information governance. What are we going to do with that information? How are we going to track and make sure that everything stays compliant so that we can support people?
Yeah, and we're probably painting organisations out to be in a bad light here, which isn't our intention at all, because there's so many incredible organisations that have the best of intents, and they're kind of stuck in the system too. There are so many individuals that this is such a passion for them, and they're stuck. They've got forms, HR have sent out forms. What do they do with this information? And we want to give individuals and organisations the tools to succeed here.
So once all this information gets to a line manager, and let's say they've gone through all these forms, the line manager is now onboarding this new member of staff who might have multiple difficulties, and we've supported them to be honest about what they need. Let's say we've done everything perfectly to this point. We now have our line manager who has to look after this person and be responsible for them within the Equality Act, within health and safety laws. What a daunting job. And it is no wonder that people get this role. So, yeah, line managers. What do we do? What do we do with this occupational health report? What does this mean to me? What does this mean to them?
And what's a reasonable adjustment? How reasonable is reasonable?
And then they start the job. And that's kind of where the process, the onboarding process finishes. Typically. 127 billion is what the UK economy spends on discrimination every year. I could not believe this when I saw this statistic. 127 billion. Blew my mind. And that is, if we split that between everybody who's currently in employment in the UK, that's 3,700 per person per year.
It's a lot. So, let's take it back. We've been through worst case scenario, this really overwhelming situation. Let's look at what individuals and organisations can actually do to make this work for everyone.
So,
oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead.
It's okay. We'll quickly go through this. So we've kind of broken everything down now into 4 key things that we see are issues. First of all, there is inaccessibility to accessibility support. If things are through forms, we need to make sure that accessibility support is accessible. Anybody who's used Access to Work and has ever maybe possibly tried to make a complaint and found out that the only way to make a complaint is by speaking to the person that you want to complain about on the phone, will understand that there isn't accessibility to accessibility at the moment. So this is something we need to approach within society, and it would be great for you to take this away today. We've mentioned responding in a timely manner to requests for accommodations. if someone asks you for an accommodation, respond immediately. First of all, to acknowledge receipt of that email, or if someone asks you verbally, respond to them with an email or writing or however they would like you to engage with them. Make sure you are responding to them so that you have a log of when they asked you. Because if something happens to them in the interim, before you actually manage to get that in place and you haven't kept that communication, you will personally, as a line manager, be liable for not having supported that person.
The other thing is, just by responding, you make an individual feel validated and that they haven't just been ignored. And this is such a simple thing to do, really, is just acknowledge receipt. And most individuals will understand it's going to take you time to go away, talk to HR or CALP, whoever it might be, but just sending them that note saying we're going to pick this up and we will get back to you and arrange a further meeting or further conversation will go a really, really long way.
Absolutely. We also mentioned about giving a reason for declining a request for accommodations. So within the Equality Act, if you are turning down someone's request for an accommodation, you have to give what's called an objective justification. Apologies if this is patronising to anyone who already knows about it, but it's worth going over. And you have to be able to explain why you feel it's not reasonable as an organisation. So we'll come to how we are going to deal with that and how we're going to support you to deal with that as well. And then finally, once you've agreed the accommodations, the person doesn't just start the job and then
you forget about it.
And then you forget about it and it's magically all okay. How do we remember to be inclusive on a day-to-day basis? If you've asked your line manager for accommodations, what happens when you work with a different department? You haven't shared that information with them. When they're organising training and you've been asked to go along, they might not know you need wheelchair access or things in a sans serif font, for example. So, we've come up with a model of foundations for what people need, what individuals need to be able to access accommodations. And this could be in work, education or services. First of all, they need to be aware that they have something that is classed as a protected characteristic and potentially as a disability. Some people may feel that there's a stigma around the word disability and may not want to refer to themselves in those terms. So we need to make sure that we are not just talking about disabilities all the time, but we are talking about, now where I need to remember the diffabilities. Or I'm trying to think of the Equality Act and what's the term. It's a substantial long-term effect on your day-to-day
lasting
living.
longer than 12 months, essentially, that has a day-to-day impact on your life.
So if we can talk in those terms rather than in terms of disabilities, then that can be useful and helpful as well. Then we have self-esteem of the individual. Now what we're talking about here is, does the person feel that they're worthy of asking for these adjustments? Have they been in environments where maybe they've experienced trauma in the past? We were speaking to someone earlier who mentioned about sort of late teenagers going into work placements and having a traumatic experience and then not having that confidence maybe to go out. Every time we experience this, it's another trauma that will kind of shut down and enclose the world of people, particularly those with autism who may not have a great experience of the workplace first time round. So we need to be doing everything we can to build the self-esteem of people with neurodiversities and autism.
Yeah, empowerment is key.
And then finally, confidence. Now this comes down to the tangible steps that you take. Looking at how you bring in the awareness from the first place, how you're promoting. Are you disability confident? Are you helping them understand that if they have a substantial day-to-day, substantial difficulty that affects their day-to-day life for more than 12 months, that's something that you can support with rather than just saying disability. Are you promoting their self-esteem by saying you may have had bad experiences, but you are worthy of this support, and it's not difficult for us to do. The idea that providing these accommodations is difficult is because the processes haven't been there. As we've seen before, it's only difficult because we haven't been doing it right. But let's not put that back on the individuals who are asking for those accommodations, because they will shut down and they will stop asking for it. And then,
just to jump in, one of the really kind of interesting things was when organisations moved to working remotely during COVID, we saw that so many more disabled individuals were able to access the workplace, because all these organisations that were saying we can't accommodate you working from home suddenly could. And what we see are the benefits then. We see the stats going up. We're seeing a more diverse workplace, which is contributing to better profits for businesses. I mean, this is what it comes down to, is profits at the end of the day with most organisations. But the more diversity you have in the workplace, the better that you're going to do.
And the more effectively you're going to be able to replicate the experiences of your stakeholders so that you can understand their needs as well. So, we've created an app, Thinkady, and what we do is we cover the first step with our user platform, and we cover these last 3 steps with our business platforms. I'm going to talk about those a little bit. So, first of all, our user side to our app, it's free to everybody. You log on, you put in your quality monitoring information, you're supported with voice recognition software, anything you need on the website for accessibility is there. Is it W3C, all that kind of coding to make sure that it's really accessible for everybody. Put in your quality information, and you can search through, following the model, social model for disability, what things might be helpful to you based on what other people have suggested or what other people have asked for. So this means that every time someone adds a new accommodation, that will be added to the system, and people will be able to search that and see what has been asked for and recognise, oh, that might be helpful to me. Because we need to move away from this idea that just because someone has a particular condition, they will need a specific thing, and move on to more of the social model of disability.
I'm a bit conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes, and this is something we can talk about for days. So again, if there's anything that you feel like we've rushed through and you want to talk about more, come up to us afterwards.
Then we have the organisation side, which has 3 main tools. So we have an accommodations manager, which helps you, gives you notifications when someone has asked for an adjustment to make sure that we cut down that not responding in time. Then it also has an accommodations manager, which takes you through the process of agreeing to those accommodations or coming up with that objective justification to make sure that we're responding in the most proactive way that's going to promote that individual self-esteem and not traumatise them and support them into the place of work. And then we have the inclusion tool, which is any event, meeting that you go to, anyone in your organisation who is connected through the app, you'll be able to select who's attending, and you'll be able to see a list of considerations for what exactly this group of people needs.
This is quite exciting because Sophie will show you a slide in a minute, but the whole process that we talked, there we go, the whole process that we talked about at the beginning is it's one-time entry for the individual. Right at the beginning, they can input their accommodations, adjustments, the organisation gets notified, and then they don't need to worry about it. The organisation can proactively managing it using the tools that we just talked about this. And it takes away all the complexity of filling in countless forms. It takes away the pressure of calling out people, having those conversations, the back and forth, and a lot of individuals feel like they're fighting battle in battle or sharing their details again and again, which can feel really quite intrusive.
And having those diversity statistics means that organisations can actually start their strategic process way before a job is advertised. And it means that they continue the process far beyond somebody just starting, and they can feel comfortable and ensured that all of their organisation are going to be able to be inclusive for that person. So that £3,700 per year is, I think, Thickady's lowest model is about £14 a month. So, and it's actually free for up to 50 members. So if you know anybody with smaller organisations, feel free to go up to our stall and get some information, because we've got a freemium model for anyone less than 50%, and also discounts for anybody in the third sector as well. So, true data is key. We want to see past those prefer not to say rates, which our diversity dashboard will help you do, because it shows a collective anonymous of everybody who's in your organisation, rather than showing those prefer not to say rates. And so, for example, the service I used to work for would be able to understand, do they need to proactively employ more people from a specific demographic, or do they need to be working on promoting people to feel more comfortable? Strategy-wise, that's gold right there.
I think one of my favourite things about data is data creates change. And that might seem a bit strange, but organisations rely on data. Stats actually mean they're going to do something about this too. And they can proactively get that data and have those conversations and make the changes, see if they're meeting their targets and KPIs, which often the board set, and no one knows how to deal with them.
And finally, I'm noticing we're at 12 o'clock, so we're going to be quick. Aim for an equitable experience, not just for equity of outcome. And what I mean by that is if you have a meeting and you have someone, for example, in a wheelchair, and you might think, okay, the building isn't accessible, but we can't change it. Let's allow them to log in online. Is that an equitable experience? No, because there will be conversations before the meeting that happen. There will be networking, there will be sharing of information and important conversations that happen. We're not always going to be able to get it perfect, but if we can all aim to try for that equitable experience when someone mentions that they have a protected characteristic, that's key, and that's what's going to take us to where we want to be. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. If you do have any questions, Merrin and I will be outside just afterwards, and also feel free to go up to our stand and have a chat with us there as well. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Cheers.